Again, good morning, afternoon, and evening to all. Again, as a reminder, as for all of our sessions today, there is a poll question for you, the audience, during the discussion. At the end of each, the results will be tallied and shown. So next panel will focus on clinical trials in India, which has already been mentioned. For a long period last decade, industry-led clinical trial activities in India withered away until they were barely detectable. Multinationals moved to other global sites, such as China. In recent years, the situation has improved somewhat. But as our distinguished panel, led by our Uber moderator, Dr. Plump, with or without facial adornments, will discuss much still needs to be done. In SWOT terminology, there are plenty of opportunities and strengths in this work. You've already heard of some from Karun and Andy, but also some key weaknesses and threats. Perception is everything. Bias is insidious. There remains considerable evidence, Andy mentioned this, making forward progress difficult. So without further ado, let me now introduce Andy to begin this critical conversation with the end game of a call to action for all of us. Andy?
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Bill, for that great introduction. And I don't think I'm going to live down my shaving accident earlier this morning for the entire day. So, but it's a pleasure to have the opportunity to moderate this panel. By way of backdrop, for the past several years, we've had a panel on clinical trial innovation as part of this summit. And this year we decided to double click and to zero in on the clinical trial landscape, the history, the current landscape, and then the opportunities that exist for increasing clinical trials with an intent of driving more innovative medicines to patients in India. We've talked about the problem statement at the very beginning, which I'll reiterate, which is that India is a population that is fourfold larger than the population of the United States, yet there are 30-fold fewer clinical trials that are run in India than are run in the United States. And that really says it all. We have an incredibly expert panel here to address this topic. Thank you very much to our Indian colleagues for joining us already well into your weekend in India Friday night. So if I can, I'd like to just go around and have each of the panels briefly introduce themselves, and then we'll launch into the discussion. And we'll start with you, Dr. Paul, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Good evening and greetings from Delhi, greetings from the organization that I represent, the NITI Aayog. I'm Vinod Paul. I'm a pediatrician by training. I was chief of pediatrics at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences. I'm currently, for the last 5 years, at NITI Aayog as a member, looking after health, nutrition, and education. NITI Aayog is the apex policy think tank of the Government of India, and it is chaired by the Honorable Prime Minister. We are very happy. I'm very, very happy to be here, thanks to Dr. Naresh Trehan's friendship call that I received, esteemed colleague, friend, philosopher, guide to me. And I'm very happy to be here for a cause, for a discussion, which is very close to my heart as a researcher myself. And I do share some of the concerns that you are talking about. I was on the other side of the table when I was doing my own work in the institution that I just now mentioned, namely AIMS. Looking forward to discussion and looking forward to making pathways open for more trials, more clinical trials, ethically correct trials in an efficient way in my nation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Paul. It's a privilege to have you as part of this panel. Dr. Trehan.
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I am in Italy right now, vacationing, but I am a cardiac surgeon by training and by profession. I am the chairman and managing director of Medanta, the Medicity. We have 6 hospitals now and over 3,000 beds. So we do have a very large clinical material available to us and very keen to understand, because we've been with Karun and in previous conversations also, we have talked about what are the things that actually need to be accomplished. And that's why I'm so glad that Dr. Paul agreed to be here, because he's the mover and shaker in this whole environment and able to do what we have to do. So I suggest to Dr. Paul and all my co-panelists that at the end of it, if we can form a very small, tight working group that can actually give us the concerns, the guidances, the essentials that will make it happen for clinical trials to be done seamlessly, because it's a shame if we are wasting such a huge reservoir of knowledge, of reservoir of clinical material, and also the enabling environment of biotechnology and all, which is already present in India. So we need to tie it up the way this panel would like us to present to be presented to us. And I'm sure that Dr. Paul's presence here will make a big difference in times to come, because that's the intention, it seems to be, on the mind of all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Trehan. So not only is it your weekend, but it's your vacation as well. So we appreciate your being here with us. Kush, how about you?
Andy, thank you. It's wonderful to be here and with these esteemed panelists, and Karan, thank you again for assembling such a wonderful group of leaders from around the world, in particular India and the US as well. I'm Kush Parmar. My day job is managing partner at a venture capital firm called 5AM Ventures. We've built over 100 biotech companies in our 20-year history, mostly here in the West, but out of a lot of personal interest and passion for globalizing our industry, more so in particularly in India. I am also on the board of Syngene, which is one of the large CROs in India. And more recently, in the past couple of years, I co-founded an entity called Immuneel Therapeutics with Kiran Mazumdar-Shah and Sid Mukherjee, whose mission is to really address what we viewed as an abject, complete absence of any clinical development or commercial access to cell therapies in cancer and other complex modality therapies. And we started that. I'll tell a bit more about that. And it's been a wonderful journey, and hopefully serves as a small example of what's possible and what we can do moving forward as well. Great to be here.
Thank you, Kush. I don't know if you were here for the oncology panel, but Immuneel was actually brought up by Elise Rice and the moderator. So you got a little bit of airtime there. And it's really exciting what you're trying to do with Sid and Kiran as well. Cynthia.
Thank you, Andy. Pleasure to be here. I'm Cindy Verst, and I'm the president of Design and Delivery Innovation at IQVIA. I've been in the industry 30 years across the pharma industry, research, payer, as well as the CRO industry. And no question, I joined this panel in the enthusiasm of the opportunity and the optimistic view of accelerating clinical trial research in India, and delighted to be a part of this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. And last but not least, Peter.
So good morning, good evening, everyone. It's great to be here. Peter Ronco, I head up the Global Development Group at Janssen Pharmaceuticals. So J&J, the pharmaceutical arm of J&J. And you've seen a number of my colleagues already this morning. So it's great to be kind of following on from that. My group is responsible for the design and then the running of all of our clinical trials across all therapeutic areas, from phase 1, first in human, all the way through to post-registration. And as part of that, we have a number of groups that are working in India. We're also very interested in how we grow and how we expand the opportunity in India, given the underlying public health need and the underlying population that really does give a great opportunity both for India, but also for the large organization. So really looking forward to the discussion today, Andy. Thank you.
Great. You know, we just had your former chairman and CEO on, Alex Gorski, of course, and he reminded us that J&J invests $15 billion a year in R&D. And of course, when you invest that much money in R&D, you can't help but be overrepresented in an innovation summit like this. So we're pleased to have you. And thanks to all the panelists again for participating. Our goal here is to level set. What is the state today of the clinical trial landscape in India? What's real and perceived in terms of barriers? And then what can we do collectively to ensure that we change that move the needle and change that number of 1.2% trials and move that in the right direction. I'd like to start, Peter, with you, and then also with you, Dr. Paul, secondly. And maybe you can help us understand some of the progressive reforms that have already been introduced into the landscape, particularly with respect to regulatory reforms. Peter.
Thanks, Andy. And let me start in a really optimistic way, because I do think that we have an amazing opportunity here. And there's always been the underlying enthusiasm. There's always been the experience of the investigators and the experience of the clinical sites. And I think that the group here is well knows the regulatory hurdles that have taken place over the last decade or so. And hopefully that is now in our rear view mirror. So if I'm looking at it from an opportunist, from a very positive standpoint, going forward, I think there's two main areas where I'm seeing great improvement. One is embedding many of the changes and innovations that we were forced to adopt during COVID. And I see changes coming through the CDSCO that are really helping to drive innovation within the clinical trial landscape. And it's things that were kind of forced on us through COVID, but I think are great innovations that need to maintain. Things like, how do we optimize the speed of review? Speed of review of regulatory packages is such a critical part of having a competitive advantage in terms of how India is competing with other countries around the world for clinical trial populations. Secondly, moving more to an online review, having those kind of data sets and data sources to be able to be accessed online. Again, this is just that needs to become the standard operating procedure for how we're working with India. And then how we continue to grow into some of the global standards and the global ways of working. I'm sure we'll get onto that in a few moments. But I really want to say that use the opportunity of the changes that have been forced on us by COVID and embed them within the regulatory environment in India to continue the progress that's been made around speed and around easily accessing the data and information. There's still a long way to go, and we'll talk about that, I think, in the next series of questions in terms of where we still need to go. But there's been a number of areas that have been good progress. The second reason for optimism is actually the broader geopolitical environment. So many large global companies, and Cindy maybe add color commentary later, we have a large book of work in areas of the world that are really not able to run research anymore. So Ukraine and Russia, for obvious reasons. We had just about 60 to 70 studies running in Ukraine at the point of the invasion. And so we are now looking as a company about how we move that book of work elsewhere around the world. We're also, and there continue to be lockdowns and additional COVID outbreaks in a number of countries that restrict the patient population there. So those geopolitical and healthcare issues around the world do provide an amazing opportunity for India. And I'm seeing a lot more of an interest coming from our global teams in terms of really looking to invest and grow and develop. So those two pieces, the regulatory environments based on the COVID changes, the geopolitical push that gives that opportunity for India to continue to grow in prominence.
Thanks, Peter. Dr. Paul, if I could turn to you with that same question, maybe from an insider perspective, what do you see as some of the most significant changes over the past several years that are enabling and attracting multinational companies to run trials in India?
Well, partly my job has been made easy with a positive tone with which remarks have been made. Thank you very much, and I'll build on them. But before that, let me just say that we would like to see India as a preferred destination for clinical trials, as a matter of fact, as a matter of policy, as a matter of intent, and a matter of effort on the part of multiple arms of the government, including my organization, which sets the stage for many policy reforms. And I must say that our organization and myself, but in particular, have been part of the COVID-related changes that have been referred to. So we will do more of this. We recognize that humanity needs new solutions, and they have to be tested. In some sense, our world has been benefited by the sacrifice, the effort that went on in other populations who subjected themselves to clinical trials. And India has many reasons to contribute toward that, and I'm coming to that direction. It's about our productivity as well. It's about our revenue generation. It's also something that will enrich our science and our academia. and our own nation in that sense. Having said that, reference has been made to the review process expediting norms that have been set. Reference has been made to online reviews, and I can also add to this the compensation, the compensation issue, which bogged us down, including my own trial of a particular drug for newborn babies, is now much more soft and friendly. We also are in a situation where the audiovisual recording of the consenting procedure is no more required. These are just additional examples that people should know. And if you conduct a trial, which is an academic trial by academia, the pathways, regulatory pathways are even more green signaled, I would say. So there is a change. We're willing to make more changes. All the point remains that these changes and the accelerated changes during the COVID pandemic effort and endeavor show the intent of the government to walk the talk. And we will take it forward. The idea to have a working group to be specific, to find specific, solutions is extremely welcome. Thank you, Naresh, for saying that. I would also like to add additionally 2 or 3 other reasons why we are serious about it. As a part of the National Biopharma Mission under the Department of Biotechnology, we have created clinical trial population sites, so to say, in areas of oncology, ophthalmology, rheumatology, diabetology in particular. So these are sites that are ready. People are trained in principle to be able to conduct the studies, and that's something very, very useful. I must say that we use these trial sites for fast-tracking COVID-19 vaccination studies, not only of Indian vaccine, but also vaccines that were tested in our country, but developed elsewhere. Likewise, in 2021, last year, the Indian Council of Medical Research has launched an initiative called INTENT, which is Indian Clinical Trial and Education Network, which aims to create capacity, create pathways, offer partnerships, and in particular, creating capacity across institutions, the ICMR institutions and others, academic institutions, to be able to take part in clinical trials. We also opened up pathways for clinical trials by private entities to be done in our universities and so on. We're working on that, and we hope to do more in that regard. In COVID times, we were able to use technology for patient interaction and, of course, interaction with investigators in a very big way. That didn't have to be physical, and that itself is a success, I would say, because the tele-connectivity and tele-education, tele-medicine, tele-consultation helped the trial processes as well, and we're very happy to state that that could be also very useful as we move forward. So for several reasons, we share the rationale for India to be made a clinical trial hub, and give you examples of how we are working in some areas. We are also looking at other pathways under a committee chaired by Secretary Health, where regulatory steps to be reduced. We are looking at that, structural changes, and further process flow modification within the CDS scope, use of IT, ensuring transparency, accountability, and smoother regulatory process, and so on and so forth. So there's yet another initiative right now which is looking at how to really smoothen the regulatory pathway. Above all, I look upon bringing clinical trials into India is to strengthen our own science enterprise, academic enterprise, and enterprise that leads to solutions for humanity. And if you also at the same time wish to produce manufacture these entities, these molecules in India, we will go and we will walk an extra mile. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Bal. I'm going to Cindy and Kush. So you just heard a very positive outlook from Peter. Dr. Ball just spent 5 minutes going through all the things that are happening in India to really make the landscape more attractive to multinational pharmaceutical companies. And yet only 1.2% of trials that are run globally are also run in India. What are the barriers? Why is it just that we're just beginning to open up and this is the front end and this is the 1.2% is a lagging measure, or are there barriers that are preventing multinationals from entering? Maybe we'll start with you, Cindy.
Sure thing. Well, I would say I'll start with some good news and then we'll talk about the barriers. IQVIA actually back in 1998, so we're approaching 25 years and the first CRO to land in India, and in fact remain the largest CRO provider to date. And we've actually have been seeing year-over-year growth in clinical trials to the tune of 8 to 10%, which is very close to the Frost in terms of some of the guidance in the industry, highlighting that CAGR growth, Frost and Sullivan in particular showcasing that 8 to 10%. And in fact, it's likely not surprising to understand that the therapeutic areas where we're seeing this growth is predominantly in oncology, cardiovascular, CNS, IDV, and in fact, ophthalmology. And so we're very optimistic in terms of especially phase 3 clinical trials that entail more than 3 regions around the globe. So global clinical programs. And to answer your question, Andy, about, what are we seeing? And I'll give you some stats relative to why sponsors are declining when we are, in fact, recommending India as a country, again, in these therapeutic areas where we have analytics, robust data to support from an epidemiologic point of view, clinical trial experience, underscoring, the quality of our investigators. The number one reason that we are getting declinations of India is due to, in part, the commercial strategy of sponsors. And again, not intending to market their product in India. Number 2 top reason is the concern of the regulatory landscape and the compensation component. And thirdly, the perception of lower quality. And so I think these are, in fact, the opportunities that we have in terms of sharpening and honing the information and the guidance regarding the intent to market in India in that commercialization component. And I would just double click in that the intent to market or the commercialization component of India. There are 2 other aspects that we'll need to address, and that is India's requirement to have approximately 25% representation of the Indian population. And the second component is the requirement of public versus private investigator sites in India. But I do want to highlight the opportunity, because when we have approached the regulatory authorities in India regarding the representation of the India population around that approximate 25% representation, and or some of the, if you will, challenges of the private versus public requirements, when we are able to bring pragmatic rationale and evidence suggesting that we need to go more private than public due to the representation. There has been very sound and very collaborative approaches with the regulatory authorities. So I think those are some of the challenges / opportunities, Andy, that we have as a healthcare ecosystem.
So you're the second person to mention an issue with compensation. Can you describe what you mean by that?
Indeed, I'm going to say commercialization. So that is, the requirement to actually bring the product to market in India. And relative to the compensation, Dr. Paul mentioned that, the notion here that any particular adverse reaction or negative impact that is trial related and the compensation that is deemed essential in India in terms of the remediation or the helping to help that patient through that journey. And or again, I think it's an opportunity because as we've seen in several publications, the Wire Science back in 2021, highlighting that in fact, the misperception is that is a huge barrier when indeed, when double clicking into the actual evidence, there are very few incidents and the compensation requirement was not extremely excessive.
Yep. So it's the liability that a multinational pharmaceutical company will carry running a trial in India. And what you're suggesting, because it's something I hear all the time from my teams when we're talking about this, it's actually the number one barrier for moving into India. And you're suggesting it's actually not a real, it's predominantly a perceived challenge, not a real challenge. And that's been borne out historically by precedents.
I absolutely correct, Andy. And in fact, our IQVIA data is, it cooperates what's being published and available.
I think that's a theme we're going to be uncovering here, which is that there are a lot of perceived challenges in working with India versus real. Kush, let's put that question to you around the barriers, perceived and or real.
So just, my vantage point here and direct on the ground experience has been through the lens of Immunil. This is an endeavor that started, like many endeavors do, started over a very agitated dinner 2.5 years ago. And it grew louder and louder over the course of the evening, talking about the fact that in established modality like CAR-T around the world, 8-10 years into that, there were 0 commercial products available in India. And not only that, there had never been a single patient in India dosed with a CAR-T, even in a clinical trial. That was just unconscionable and I think crazy. And so we left from that and said, well, why is that? And if that is just true and going to be the case here, we're not going to just wait for that to happen. We're going to just make it happen. So that was the genesis of Immunil 2.5 years ago over that dinner. Here we are 2.5 years later. We announced earlier this week that we've dosed our very first patients in a first CD19 CAR-T study in Bangalore. And we have another program that hopefully will be entering the clinic later this year. So by definition, the fact is that there were no insurmountable barriers. And at the very beginning, the first calls we made before we decided how are we going to go about doing this, we called our friends in large companies that had established products in other jurisdictions and asked them about their interest in India. And in general, there was definitely pulling on heartstrings for sure and interest in enabling access. There's 1.2 billion people. But generally, I think perception issues of, wow, how are we going to do that? Regulatory, commercial, pricing, all of those things were substantial, vague, I would say, nothing really, really concrete, but generally vague hesitation and waiting for something to be proven out. And that is what we set out to do, which is to say, let's try and do that. Did we have hurdles to overcome? Absolutely, but nothing insurmountable. And those hurdles, I would say, were clearly the perception externally was very clear. It had declared itself by being completely non-represented in India. The internal hurdles and perception, there are some as well. This is clearly a very complex modality, one of the most complex our industry has ever developed. And a phase 1-2 study in a setting like this is highly innovative, has a lot of unknowns. The regulatory science is quite new here as well. And I would say that there is some reluctance within investigators and perhaps regulators as well on the earlier side of first in human and earlier clinical development. And that is a general vague, and I don't think a fundamentally sound, but a vague sort of bias on the internal side. And the second piece, not surprisingly, for a complex modality, there were a lot of agencies to work with. And I think there was a lot of streamlining that absolutely could have gotten us into the clinic even sooner because of the lack of communication between different agencies. And some of this that is being worked on, Dr. Paul, on online-based, highly efficient submissions and timely reviews and transparent reviews as well. One thing that was a big enabler, we think, also was just a lot of collaboration. For anything like this, I mean, Immunil, if it's anything, it is a product of collaboration with the regulators, with external experts as well, for something that is a new modality where most of the clinical and regulatory experience has been outside of India. How do we just make sure we're opening the door to that kind of collaboration so we can maintain rigor and quality on international standards within India as well? So those would be two of the comments that I would say that were hurdles, not fundamental barriers, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, again, we're seeing that when you want to make it happen, actually it can happen. And a lot of what we are imagining as challenges are not real challenges. Dr. Trehan, I'd like to bring you into the conversation. So I'm going to pull you out of your vacation for a couple of minutes. You know, running a mega center at Medanta and all the clinical trials that you run. I guess two questions for you. The first is, are you seeing changes? Are you seeing more interest in running trials at Medanta and more broadly in the India landscape? And then secondly, I guess depending on that answer, what's preventing multinational pharma companies from coming in your estimation? Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. So, most definitely there has been a incremental interest in doing trials in India. What had happened was, for a brief background, I will tell you that about 2014 or so, there were lots of doubts raised around the whole table about, what the ethics standards were, how well it was being followed. They needed, so a new policy was made, which is actually what we are talking about today, that it has led to a lot of confidence around the world that yes, India has made quite a stride as far as the reality of conducting clinical trials is concerned. Even from J&J, just recently their group was there. They're trying to innovate some new ideas of trying to do quick trials in larger centers so that it's not like there are 50 centers where each one is recruiting 2, 3, 4, 5 people, but to choose the centers for particular areas where larger recruitment can take place in a shorter period of time, like we have, say, like cancer. Some of them, like Medanta is one of the major cancer centers. There are other 2, 3 of them. They're all being pulled together. So I think there are many, many innovative things happening to make it possible to move forward, which has been the desire around the world. But one of the impediments was, which is also correct today, is the fact that India is not a banana republic. India wants to do the right thing by the right people. Also, there were other countries that made it more convenient with very loose regulatory processes to be able to do middle of the night research, which becomes quite convenient in some ways. So leave that aside. Now it has not happened that we have a very robust framework, which is very friendly in a way. But yet, as we heard around the panel, there are certain concerns. Now, those pain points need to be addressed. And that's why we are fortunate that Dr. Paul agreed to be participating in spite of his very busy schedule, that he can, if we can, like I suggested in the very beginning, put together 3, 4, 5 people who will actually continuously bring up the pain points that they are experiencing, and the new ones may come up as we move. So it's a very dynamic process. But there is willingness on the apex body, which is NITI Aayog, which is basically the maximum inputs that come into government policy comes from NITI, and Dr. Paul is heading the health sector. So between him and the health ministry, there is a seamless communication and development that's happening. So please take advantage of it today. If there is interest, like you said, that there are areas where there were trials being done in Ukraine and in some of the other countries where it was convenient, but there are for reasons otherwise that they need to be relocated. India is the ideal spot because you will get the credibility of the data is good. And if we have to make it even better, yes, we'll welcome any suggestions that come from people who have that knowledge around that. How can you actually increase the confidence in the data that comes out of India? And that is a very important, critical part that we must address in addition to the hurdles that we are talking about. So I think that if we move forward, we can, with discussions like this, let's not make it a one-day affair and let's come back to it 1 year later. Let's try to do something which is in a continuum, and we have the ears of the responsible people. And certainly I'm there. I was very much part of the policy change that took place from 14 to 19, and then pandemic hit. So there was a lot of confusion going on. But the credentials of India have definitely taken a huge jump upwards since the pandemic, and also coupled with the friendly regulatory environment. And I'm glad Cynthia said this about this. We also practice in very high-end medicine. Like my work, like my slogan is, my personal, I've got a big team, but personally, I will operate on the inoperables. So we have a very high level of scrutiny for our work, and that there is a very, very robust malpractice law in place. So it is a very fair one. 99% of cases have been settled in favor of the doctors. 99% or 95% or more have been done for any other liability that may have occurred. And the awards are very small. So I don't even see why there is so much anxiety around the world about it. It's just a slogan by itself that is turning people off. But if there is clarification needed, we'd be happy to do that. So one by one, whatever your concerns are, let's consolidate them into one passage and let's address them together. And maybe we can call this panel back and be able to give you some more information and reassurances. Because we are very...
I just want to keep going. Dr. Paul, I'm going to come back to you in a bit. Let's talk about now, because what we're hearing, it's very frustrating to me, what I'm hearing, which is that we've made such huge progress. The doors are open. The opportunity is there, but we're tiptoeing in. We're not even walking in. So Peter, what can we do to help to accelerate and remove some of these biases, educate and accelerate what we need to do, which is drive more access in India through trials?
Perfect. Yeah, because I agree with all the comments that there's a lot of this is the bias and perceptions and misperceptions in many cases. So I think there's three things that I would focus on, and kind of three themes that I think we can actually then start actioning. Number one, there is still an opportunity to continue to evolve and improve the regulatory space. And we've talked about areas such as tightening up how we do the intent to commercialize and what that actually means. Talking about how we actually use the opportunity in India around e-consent and taking it from a patient standpoint to actually be able to have more of a cutting edge approach to how you take consent. And then how you manage with post-study drugs. So there's an opportunity to tighten up the regulatory landscape. But the most important thing there is stability. What people fear is instability and changes in regulations. And that's the biggest perception that I continue to hear is, yeah, it's good now, but it could go down tomorrow, the next month, the next year. So I think the more we can continue to message stability in the regulatory environment, I think is first. Number two, use the data, consolidate data across the industry, both large pharma, small pharma, CROs, because individually, J&J, who's running a large number of studies, is still relatively small in India. So how can we have consolidated data on what we're seeing from a quality standpoint? As you talked earlier on about the number of cases that we're getting around compensation or around the feasibility of where we could actually run some of these really more complex, either CAR-T, gene therapy type studies. Consolidate the industry data to showcase what we as an industry can be doing in a more integrated way, because individual companies don't have yet the sufficient experience to go back on. The third piece is then just really appealing to our heart by actually showcasing and the shameless self-promotion of some of the examples where this goes well. Okay, nothing fuels the competitive spirit of pharmaceutical companies than pointing over the fence and saying, Your competitor's already doing this. Why aren't you? So let's use that as a broader industry group to have some of that shameless self-promotion of some of the early movers to be able to spark that competitive nature with other pharma companies.
Dr. Paul, maybe you can follow on to Peter's comments and tell us a little bit about what India can continue to do to address some of the perceptions and some of the persistent issues that Peter's mentioning and that you've heard from Cynthia and others. And then what can we do together? What can we do together? You have an incredible group of engaged individuals, not just on this panel, but who are part of USAIC. What can we do to help? Because it sounds like the door is open. We just need to enter.
Thank you. Firstly, I think, if you look at the trend of, the point was made with regard to stability, right? Unstable in which way? So if you look at the trend, the instability would be towards a positive direction. We'll be better next year, solving problems that may still be besetting this sector, finding solutions to the pain points, as Naresh has mentioned. So please be rest assured that there is a general consensus across stakeholders for us to move in the direction that is toward making India an ethical hub of clinical trials. So this is a general consensus within the government and across the stakeholders. And we had bad moments, but I think from there the journey is only toward betterment. So the instability is not in the wrong direction. The instability will be in the positive direction. But more positive things would happen. That's putting it, metaphorically. But I want to come back to 2 points that Cynthia mentioned. Three points that she mentioned. The not intending to market in India. I don't know what we can do about it. India needs all kinds of drugs for all kinds of diseases, given our diverse population, which suffers from the diseases of the old and the diseases of the new, as also the frontline therapeutics. We need them. We need them for cancer. We need them for heart. We need them for Alzheimer. So I don't know why anybody would not like to market in India. I never heard this notion that people would not like to market in India. I always know, I'm not an economist, that India is the largest market for everything, from ice cream to drugs to car tea. Having said that, Cynthia, you made 2 points with regard to compensation and perception of lower quality. I want to come to this. For compensation, I would say I was trying to do an academic but regulatory trial for a drug in newborn babies. And, it was a nightmare because nobody in my institution ever done a regulatory trial. We had done very simple trials, so many patients we do. Just nightmare, and I do know how difficult path that is to have video recording. I succeeded in completing a trial during that phase on hundreds of patients. I like to know from you that the compensation regime that you now have with efforts of Dr. Trehan and others, is that still not something which is a global norm? What is it that we can do more about it? I thought it's quite reasonable. I thought it's quite a balance that Naresh and their other distinguished colleagues were able to achieve. If you think there is still an issue, we can try to understand that and find a way forward. But if it is reasonably, it's a balance given the India's democratic moorings, civil society, courts and law, then let's celebrate the success that we can pull, as Peter said, and make a success that it is possible. Kush said we have surmountable issues. So I like to understand that maybe on another forum. The second point is about perception of lower quality and this issue of representation of public versus private. Here, I'm not going into details, and again, I like to understand what it means and how we can solve it. But one thing which worries me, and I want to flag that sometimes for even very reputed CROs and reputed companies, I would find that the trial that has been done in India on 27 patients is in a nursing home in a tier 3 city. And I'm shocked. As a doctor, I'm shocked. As an academic, I'm shocked even more. Why would you have to go to these, sundry places for 13 cases here and 23 here, 17 here, overcompensating the doctors who come to do trials? In fact, that puts me off, had put me off. I like to understand, is there a better view? Who are the people who need to do this? I'm sure it is not a norm, but it is there. I'm surprised, completely surprised, that a third tier nursing home is where a very important fertility trial, for example, is being done. So I'd like to understand this, and indeed, I cannot accept.
Dr. Paul, I'm sorry to cut you off, Dr. Paul, but we're out of time.
Just one sentence, with your permission. Okay. I cannot accept, as part of the government, that India would be known for doing poor quality trials. We would like to be known for high quality trials, ethical trials, and to contribute toward science and solutions for the humanity. Thank you.
Well, I don't want to put words in Cindy's mouth. I think that she's suggesting a perception, actually. And so, and I think that that's a theme from this call. And that's actually something I've learned. I'm so glad we set up this panel, because I feel that I've learned in going through the prep for this panel and actually listening to all of you. I want to hear a commitment. So it sounds like there's a willingness to, on the India side, to hear feedback, and a willingness on the multinational side to figure out ways where we can come together to share success stories and to correct misperceptions and ensure that the facts are out there so that we can really move the needle on this 1.2%. So raise your hand if you're willing to participate in an activity after this panel. I am. And if we can put together a small, 2 hands, Peter, if we can put together a small group, actually, so that next year when we come back, we can actually show progress that we're making on that 1.2%. Yeah, great. Terrific. What a great eye-opening panel. And there's just so much opportunity for us moving forward. Really appreciate all of you stepping in. Dr. Paul, thank you so much. 10:30 at night, Friday night and the weekend. Thank you all very much. And we'll look forward to making a big difference together.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Karun.
Thank you.
Karun, you need to keep it moving.
We need some action. I think this plan of action needs to be translated, Dr. Trehan, into actual concrete results. And I remember meeting Dr. Paul, I think 2018-19, when I think his dear friend and colleague, Dr. Nirmal Ganguly, introduced, and we met. And he wrote in his cabin a nice, first time I saw somebody writing very clearly. He said, "What do you want to do?" Okay, we are talking innovation, R&D. He said, "Tell me how this can happen and look at some concrete things." So I think I'm glad we are here, Dr. Trehan, Dr. Vinod Paul, and all the colleagues. I think now the plan of action needs to be translated into actual scalable trials, ethical trials in India for the benefit of patients and for the benefit of science. So thank you so much, all of you.